Here's Chuck Todd.
Good day, everyone. We are coming on the air with some breaking news. It's a major development in the investigation of Russian interference into the 2016 election. It's the indictment of 13 Russian nationals. These are the first criminal indictments tied directly to Russian involvement in the 2016 election. And it's a revealing look, the indictment itself, at just how the Russians did it. In a few minutes, we're going to hear from Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. He'll appear before cameras at the Justice Department to go through this indictment in what can only be called a hastily arranged news conference announced literally just about 25 minutes ago. My colleague Tom Costello is here with me in Washington. He and I have been racing through this indictment, learning a lot of stuff. Tom, share some of the highlights in this indictment.
It's very thick, and there is a lot of detail. But let me read some of the highlights. And again, this is just breaking now. It says here that from in or around 2014 to the present, defendants knowingly and intentionally conspired with each other and with persons known and unknown to the grand jury to defraud the United States by impairing, obstructing, and defeating the lawful functions of the government through fraud, deceit, for the purposes of interfering with the U.S. elections. How did they do this? The defendants, posing as U.S. persons and creating false U.S. personas, operated social media pages essentially designed to attract U.S. audiences. These groups and pages, which addressed divisive U.S. political and social issues, falsely claimed to be controlled by U.S. activists when, in fact, they were controlled by defendants, by Russians. Let me give you a couple of examples. The organization, there is one internet research organization, Russian-based, which is among the 13 defendants, had a strategic goal to sow discord in the U.S. political system, including the presidential elections. They posted derogatory information about a number of candidates, and in early to mid-2016, they included supporting the presidential campaign of Donald Trump and disparaging Hillary Clinton. They go on to say, buying political advertisements. Here's the Attorney General.
Presented by the Special Counsel's Office. The indictment charges 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian companies for committing federal crimes while seeking to interfere in the United States political system, including the 2016 presidential election. The defendants allegedly conducted what they called information warfare against the United States, with the stated goal of spreading distrust towards the candidates and the political system in general. According to the allegations in the indictment, 12 of the individual defendants worked at various times for a company called Internet Research Agency, LLC, a Russian company based in St. Petersburg. The other individual defendant, Yevgeny Viktorovich Prigozhin, funded the conspiracy through companies known as Concord Management and Consulting, LLC, Concord Catering, and many affiliates and subsidiaries. The conspiracy was part of a larger operation called Project Lakta. Project Lakta included multiple components, some involving domestic audiences within the Russian Federation and others targeting foreign audiences in multiple countries. Internet Research Agency allegedly operated through Russian shell companies. It employed hundreds of people in its online operations, ranging from creators of fictitious personas to technical and administrative support personnel with an annual budget of millions of dollars. Internet Research Agency was a structured organization headed by a management group and arranged into departments, including graphics, search engine optimization, information technology, and finance departments. In 2014, the company established a translator project focused on the United States. In July of 2016, more than 80 employees were assigned to the translator project. 2 of the defendants allegedly traveled to the United States in 2014 to collect intelligence for their American influence operations. In order to hide the Russian origins of their activities, the defendants allegedly purchased space on computer servers located here in the United States in order to set up a virtual private network. The defendants allegedly used that infrastructure to establish hundreds of accounts on social media networks such as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, making it appear that those accounts were controlled by persons located in the United States. They used stolen or fictitious American identities, fraudulent bank accounts, and false identification documents. The defendants posed as politically and socially active Americans, advocating for and against particular candidates. They established social media pages and groups to communicate with unwitting Americans. They also purchased political advertisements on social media networks. The Russians also recruited and paid real Americans to engage in political activities, promote political campaigns, and stage political rallies. The defendants and their co-conspirators pretended to be grassroots activists. According to the indictment, the Americans did not know that they were communicating with Russians. After the election, the defendants allegedly staged rallies to support the president-elect while simultaneously staging rallies to protest his election. For example, the defendants organized one rally to support the president-elect and another rally to oppose him, both in New York on the same day. On September 13th of 2017, soon after the news media reported that the special counsel's office was investigating evidence that Russian operatives had used social media to interfere with the 2016 election, one defendant allegedly wrote, quote, "We had a slight crisis here at work. The FBI busted our activity. So I got preoccupied with covering tracks together with my colleagues," end quote. The indictment includes 8 criminal counts. Count 1 alleges a criminal conspiracy to defraud the United States by all of the defendants. The defendants allegedly conspired to defraud America by impairing the lawful functions of the Federal Election Commission, the United States Department of Justice, and the Department of State. Those organizations of the U.S. government are responsible for administering federal requirements for disclosure of foreign involvement in certain domestic activities. Count 2 charges conspiracy to commit wire fraud and bank fraud by Internet Research Agency and 2 of the individual defendants. And counts 3 through 8 charge aggravated identity theft by Internet Research Agency and 4 individuals. Now, there is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election. I want to caution you that everyone charged with a crime is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in court. At trial, prosecutors must introduce credible evidence that is sufficient to prove each defendant guilty beyond any reasonable doubt to a unanimous jury. The special counsel's investigation is ongoing. There will be no comments from the special counsel at this time. This indictment serves as a reminder that people are not always who they appear to be on the internet. The indictment alleges that the Russian conspirators want to promote discord in the United States and undermine public confidence in democracy. We must not allow them to succeed. The Department of Justice will continue to work cooperatively with other law enforcement and intelligence agencies and with the Congress to defend our nation against similar current and future efforts. I want to thank the federal agents and prosecutors who are working on this case for their exceptional service, and I'll be happy to take a few questions.
Is there concern that this indictment undermines the outcome of the election?
What I have identified for you are the allegations in the indictment. There's no allegation in the indictment of any effect on the outcome of the election. Jessica.
On page 4 of the indictment, paragraph 6, it specifically talks about the Trump campaign, saying that defendants communicated with unwitting individuals associated with the Trump campaign. My question is, later in the indictment, campaign officials are referenced, not by their name, by campaign official 1 or 2 or 3. Were campaign officials cooperative, or were they duped? What was their relationship with this?
Again, there's no allegation in this indictment that any American had any knowledge. And the nature of the scheme was that the defendants took extraordinary steps to make it appear that they were ordinary American political activists, even going so far as to base their activities on a virtual private network here in the United States. So if anybody traced it back to that first jump, they appear to be Americans. Catherine.
Have you had any assurances from the Russians that they will provide these individuals for prosecution?
No communication with the Russians about this. Will follow the ordinary process of seeking cooperation and extradition.
Thank you, Rush. Heard it. That was the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, and he is the person, because the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has to recuse himself from all things having to do with the Russia investigation. It is Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, that oversees what we essentially in shorthand call the Mueller probe. And what you just heard today is the cleanest and clearest explanation of how the Russians interfered in the 2016 election. And if you read the indictment, it is essentially a bit of a page-turner in how they did it, how they infiltrated social media, how they duped American citizens, and how they tried to cover their tracks. Let's go to the White House first. Kristen Welker is there. And Kristen, the word hoax is in my head over and over. This is not a hoax from the Department of Justice right now. Does the White House acknowledge that the idea of Russian interference is no longer a hoax?
Well, I can tell you that the talking point, Chuck, right now out of the White House is that the way in which this entire process is being handled, and this is from one White House official, underscores that they see President Trump as a part of the process, not a part of the problem. This White House official telling me that President Trump was briefed personally by Rod Rosenstein as well as FBI Director Christopher Wray at the White House earlier today. Now, in terms of that issue, President Trump has consistently referred to the Russia probe as a hoax. We've consistently pressed the White House to say, do they now acknowledge this is legitimate? So far, you haven't had that from the president himself, Chuck. You have a number of top officials here trying to choose their words very carefully to say that they respect the process and they want it to be concluded as quickly as possible. But there is no issue that gets under the president's skin more than the Russia probe. He sees this as potentially delegitimizing his election. The White House right now very focused on what we heard at the end from the Deputy Attorney General. The fact that, according to what we just heard, no U.S. citizens wittingly participated in this attempt to collude in the election. So I think that is the word you're going to hear them go back to. And of course, this is getting closer and closer to the Oval Office. We know that Steve Bannon, the president's former top advisor, spoke with Robert Mueller. We know that there are discussions underway right now between the president's legal team and the special counsel about a potential interview with the president. So this is something that continues to roil this White House more than a year in, Chuck.
But Kristen, any concern that the Russians did it? Like, I understand they seem to be wanting to be focused on how to deflect connections to the Trump campaign. But what I noticed here is it doesn't sound like anybody is, oh, wow, now we've got to get refocused on the sanctions situation. Nothing like that?
Right. Not yet. It's very early, and we should say we've reached out to a range of White House officials. So far, we've only heard from one who says, look, yes, these are the first indictments, and that is significant. It's going to make it very hard for them to say that this is now, or for the president to argue that this is in any way a hoax. There's no doubt this is a significant step. But again, Chuck, I think what you're going to hear, the talking point, at least at this point, is going to be to try to put the focus on that word unwitting, that essentially Americans were duped, and that anyone from the Trump campaign who may have had interactions with any of these Russians were duped. Chuck.
Kristen Welker at the White House for us. Hallie Jackson was in the room at Justice Department. Hallie, let me check in with you very quickly. Right at the end, the Deputy Attorney General was asked, do we have any assurances that the Russians are going to turn over these folks? It sounds like the way he worded it was a glorified way of saying that it's not going to happen. But what do you know?
Yeah, I mean, you heard the same thing from Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein there, Chuck, on that topic and on what happens next. And I do think that there is still a critical question that has not been answered yet, which is what is this administration doing to make sure this does not happen again in the midterms just a few months from now and in 2020? It is not clear what steps have been taken. You hear from, for example, the Department of Homeland Security. You hear from the White House in our interactions with folks at the West Wing that they are working on this. But this is, I think, underscores and clarifies what a critical issue this will be for the elections coming up down the road. I also want to point out one other thing, because the Deputy Attorney General was pressed on the idea, as you and Kristen have been talking about, that no American had wittingly known about the Russian interaction here. But remember his words here. He talked specifically about, in this indictment, these specific allegations. And I think that is worth noting. Also worth noting, he gave the same response when asked about this potentially altering the outcome of the election. Again, in this indictment, in these allegations here, Chuck.
I'm so glad you pointed out that phraseology. I picked up on it, too. He kept saying, this indictment says, this indictment says. There was no conclusion drawing by him at all. Hallie Jackson, thanks very much. Let me go back to Tom Costello. Tom, I know you've been reading more of this.
Well, the scope of this is astonishing.
The scope is so big.
Go ahead.
It is. No, it does seem to be. It is Facebook finally coming clean at some point that seemed to unlock a whole bunch of avenues here for the Justice Department.
The allegation here is that the Russians took full advantage of U.S. social media, not only Facebook but Twitter, that they used election-related hashtags, Trump 2016, hashtag Trump train, MAGA, Make America Great Again, I Won't Protect Hillary, hashtag. All of these were specifically used, it says here, quote, to use any opportunity to criticize Hillary and the rest, quoting the Russian operative, also encouraging minorities not to vote, encouraging the notion that there was widespread voter fraud. Also, Facebook posts organizing pro-Trump rallies or anti-Hillary rallies, and paying for people to dress up in Hillary costumes in which she was in prison guard. Really an astonishing all-out effort that went not only through the election, but even post-election, organizing, it says here, post-election rallies, if you will, for President-elect Trump. And all of this, as they were discovered, page 24 of the indictment, moving on to the next page, it talks about the fact that they were discovered by the FBI. I'm quoting now a Russian operative quoted in the indictment. We had a slight crisis here at work. The FBI busted our activity. Not a joke. I got preoccupied with covering tracks together with our colleagues. I created all these pictures and posts, and the Americans believed that it was written by their people. Quoting a Russian operative there on page 24 of the indictment once the FBI was onto them. The scope of this is absolutely astonishing, how hundreds of various accounts to create potentially thousands or more posts, fake posts on Twitter and Facebook to manipulate the election.
And we should emphasize here, the indictments of these Russian individuals, the likelihood they ever face trial depends everything on Vladimir Putin deciding to let them be extradited.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. I mean, the point, it seems to me, the point of Mueller's team laying this out now is to essentially try to wake up the country to the scope of the fraud, or more precisely, the scope of the cyber war, information war being waged against the United States by Russia. In the view of many cyber experts I've talked to over the past year or so, and I got to say I've been immersed in this in an academic pursuit as well over the last 6 months, we are, in fact, engaged in an all-out cyber warfare with the Russians, and we're very much not even playing on the same field that they're on.
Well, we're playing by a certain set of ethics.
That's right.
I think that they might not be playing on. Tom Costello, thank you very much. One last word. Let me go back to Hallie Jackson. This indictment, it seems to me, Hallie, is Mueller essentially showing the country this is how we did it. And now, okay, lawmakers, it is up to you to punish the Russians here. Is the president ready to start actually punishing them with sanctions?
Remember what the president has said up to this point so far, Chuck, which is when asked about Russian interference in the election, after months of being pressed, he said, yes, it may have been the Russians and it may have been other countries as well. There is no evidence of that today. Coming out of the Department of Justice, the question now for the White House is not just what are you going to do to stop this again, it's also what are you going to do to punish the Russians? They've kept some sanctions in place, but you know that the president has been loath to go after Vladimir Putin in some ways that people on Capitol Hill would like to see him do, because he says he wants to cooperate in other areas. Let's see if this changes the game for him.
Yeah, we shall see, and let's see if this changes the game with a lot of people that have been quietly supporting him. Hallie Jackson at the Justice Department for us. For Tom Costello, Hallie Jackson, Kristen Welker, extraordinary developments and fascinating new details in this story today. It's unfolding now. It's been unfolding for well over a year. Clearly far from over. But this is not a hoax. This is the details of how the Russian did it. Now we'll have full details tonight on the NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. For now, and for all of my colleagues, I'm Chuck Todd, NBC News, Washington.